Hi, I'm Rachel Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and tonight, while sitting at the dining table in the house I grew up in, I had to fight back tears as my own mother laughed and told my brother's fiancée that I was just a nobody with some office job. I didn't cry, not really, just that quiet kind of burning behind the eyes, the kind you train yourself to swallow after years of learning you don't matter in the room. I blinked once, then again, steadying my breath as my fingers tightened around my wine glass. Smile. Don't make a scene. That's the rule. That's always been the rule. I'd flown in for this, booked time off, bought a new dress, told myself, stupidly, that maybe this time would be different, that maybe they'd ask how I was, that maybe someone at this table would see me. But no, they only saw Michael, as always. Michael, the prodigy. Michael, the partner. Michael, who brought home Jessica, the elegant, intelligent woman now sitting across from me, watching me with growing confusion. She'd asked what I did for a living. Simple question. But before I could answer, my mother jumped in, her voice light and dismissive. Oh, Rachel, she works in publishing or something, some little press job. She's always had her head in the clouds, bless her. She said it with a laugh, like a joke, like I wasn't right there. The worst part? No one blinked. Not my father, who kept quietly chewing his roast beef. Not Michael, who stared into his wine like it had the answers. Not even me, at least not out loud. I just smiled and nodded, because that's what I've always done. I went silent, faded, dissolved like sugar in tea. But then I saw Jessica's hands move beneath the table. Her phone lit up. She was typing something. My name. I could feel it. She looked down, paused, then again, scrolled, her brows furrowed, her eyes widened. Slowly she looked up at me, not past me, not through me, at me. I held her gaze. My hands trembled in my lap. Jessica has found out who I am. The room is still buzzing with wedding talk, cake flavors, honeymoon plans in Tuscany. My mother is laughing again, already forgetting I exist. But Jessica hasn't looked away. And I know, God, I know, the silence that's protected me all these years is about to crack open. They're finally going to see me. And I don't know if I'm ready to be seen. The roast beef is going cold on my plate, but I keep cutting it into small pieces just to have something to do with my hands. Across the table, the show continues. My mother laughs at something Michael says, tossing her head back the way she always does when she wants people to believe she's effortlessly amused. Jessica smiles along, still holding her phone under the table, occasionally sneaking glances my way with an expression I can't quite read. But the others haven't noticed. They never do. At this table, there's an unspoken structure as rigid as the place settings. My mother is the queen, sharp-eyed, image-obsessed, fluent in backhanded compliments and status signals. She orchestrates everything, menus, small talk, and the hierarchy we're all expected to obey. My father sits at the head, a silent figure with a polite smile and a glass of wine he'll nurse all evening. He's always been a gentleman, which in this house meant invisible. He follows her lead, nodding when expected, disagreeing with no one, especially not her. Michael, of course, is the son we all revolve around. The prodigy, the benchmark. Every childhood trophy of his still lives somewhere in this house. His graduation photo hangs in the hallway like a shrine. I once asked why mine wasn't framed beside it. My mother said she simply hadn't gotten around to it. That was 12 years ago. And then there's me, seated at the farthest end of the table. No one had to say it out loud. This seat has always been mine, out of the spotlight, out of the way. It's not that they're cruel, not overtly. It's just that I don't fit the script they wrote for themselves. The successful family with the brilliant son, the polished mother, the agreeable father, and the daughter. Well, she reads a lot. Every few minutes, I feel Jessica's eyes flick back to me. Her smile has shifted. It's no longer just polite, it's curious, hesitant, as if something has clicked. I don't know what she's found yet, but I know she's found something. And I know this dinner, this hierarchy, this carefully balanced family performance, it's about to unravel. The first time I realized my voice didn't matter, I was 8 years old and trembling with pride. I had written a story about a girl who could speak to animals, pages stapled together with crayon illustrations and a bright red A+ at the top. My teacher had written extraordinary imagination in looping letters. I couldn't stop smiling. I ran into the kitchen, waving the story like it was on fire. My mother was standing at the counter, sorting cupcakes into a box for Michael's science fair. I remember the scent of vanilla frosting and the sharp snap in her voice when I interrupted her concentration. "Look what I wrote," I said, practically vibrating. She took the paper, glanced for maybe 2 seconds, then handed it back without even flipping the page. "That's nice, sweetheart," she said, wiping her hands. "Now put it on the counter. We have to be out the door in 10 minutes. I waited all evening for her to ask me about it. She didn't. 3 days later, I found it on the counter beneath an unopened gas bill and 2 coupons for cleaning products. There was a coffee ring across page 2. It hadn't even been read. I didn't cry. I just folded it up and put it in my backpack like it had never mattered. It kept happening. In 6th grade, I won a district-wide short story competition. My English teacher had tears in her eyes when she handed me the certificate. I was the only student in our school chosen to read their work aloud at the county auditorium. I told my parents over dinner, heart thudding in my chest. Michael had baseball practice that same night. "You understand, right?" my father said gently, glancing at my mother for backup. "This is an important game for your brother." So I read my story to an audience of strangers while my parents sat in bleachers, cheering for someone else. In high school, I joined the school newspaper and worked my way up to editor-in-chief. I wrote op-eds that won state awards. I had bylines in teen literary magazines. One story was picked up by a local paper. I clipped it out and taped it to the fridge. The next morning, it was gone, replaced by a photo of Michael at his internship. When I asked, my mother said, "Oh, I thought that was just junk mail." She always smiled when she said things like that, like it was meant to be funny. By the time I got accepted into college in New York, I didn't bother telling them I'd won a National Youth Writing Award. They were busy planning Michael's graduation party, so I packed my bags, boarded a plane, and promised myself I'd find people who didn't need to be convinced I mattered. But part of me still wanted them to ask, to notice, to read one page, just once. The plane ticket was one way, folded neatly between the pages of a notebook I hadn't let out of my sight for weeks. I was 18, clutching 2 suitcases and the thinnest sliver of hope that somewhere far from here I could start over, not just as the girl who wrote stories, but as someone who might actually be seen. No one came to the airport with me. My mother said she had a lunch at the club she couldn't reschedule. My father offered to drive me the night before, but I told him not to bother. It was easier that way, cleaner. The last thing I wanted was a tearful goodbye from people who hadn't even opened the envelope with my scholarship letter. I landed in New York in the middle of August. The air was thick with heat and exhaust, and everything felt too loud, too fast, too much. But I was alone, and I was free. That counted for something. The apartment was tiny, 2 bedrooms turned into 3 with a fake wall, cockroaches in the corners, and water that ran brown every other Tuesday. But it was mine. I shared it with 2 other girls I met through a classifieds ad. One was a photography major with magenta hair. The other painted murals at night and slept during the day. I didn't care. No one knew me here. No one compared me to anyone else. I could be whoever I wanted to be. I worked mornings at a coffee shop on 14th Street, dragging myself out of bed at 4:45 a.m. to open the doors before the commuters came. I wiped counters, smiled through tired eyes, learned how to spell names wrong on purpose to make customers laugh. In the afternoons, I dropped off resumes at publishing houses and literary magazines. In the evenings, I wrote. I wrote at the edge of my mattress, laptop balanced on a crate, legs going numb. I wrote until my fingers cramped, until the city quieted, until the pain of being unseen began to soften just a little. I taped my rejection letters to the wall, not to punish myself, but to prove I was trying. Every no thank you was one step closer to someone saying yes. That's what I told myself. On good days, I believed it. Sometimes I'd think about calling home just to say, I'm okay, I'm doing something. But I didn't, because I knew what I'd hear. That's nice, sweetheart. Michael just got a new car. So instead, I kept my head down. I worked, I wrote, I rewrote. I kept going because I had no choice. Because somewhere deep inside me was a quiet, steady voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, I was worth seeing. And if they wouldn't see me, then I would make sure the world did. The struggle didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, through rent that emptied my account, coffee shifts that left my feet numb, and the silence that followed every submission I sent into the void. I woke up before the sun most days, slipping into black jeans and a company t-shirt still damp from last night's wash. At the coffee shop, I poured oat milk for Wall Street assistants and memorized the regulars' names just to hear someone say mine in return. My manager liked me because I was quiet and didn't complain. That's what I had learned to be good at, taking up as little space as possible. By early afternoon, I'd race across the city to drop off resumes or cold email editors from the public library's free computers. I didn't have connections or a polished portfolio, just a binder of short stories I refused to give up on and a stubbornness that wouldn't let me quit. Most nights, I wrote until 2 or 3 in the morning, hunched over a wobbly desk wedged between my bed and the radiator. The only light came from a flickering lamp I'd salvaged from the sidewalk. Outside, the city never really slept, but in those hours, it felt quieter, like the world had forgotten me, and I could finally hear myself think. The stories poured out, fractured families, lonely girls, aching silences. I wrote about what I couldn't say out loud. I wrote to feel real. Sometimes I cried at the keyboard without knowing exactly why. Other times I felt like my skin was buzzing, like maybe I was getting close to something that mattered. I kept every rejection. Some were form letters, others carried polite encouragements that felt more painful than silence. Your work is promising, but not quite the right fit. I read those lines like prayers, searching for any proof that I wasn't wasting my time. Back home, they didn't ask. When I called, I kept things vague. My mother talked about Michael's job, Michael's condo, Michael's new girlfriend from Shaker Heights. I said I was doing freelance stuff, which seemed to satisfy them. No one ever asked to read what I was writing. No one asked if I was okay. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Because even when everything felt heavy, when my fingers cramped, when I fell asleep face down on the keyboard, when I counted coins for rice, I believed there was something waiting for me on the other side of all this. Not fame, not fortune, just the chance to be heard. And that was worth everything. She scared everyone. That was the first thing I heard about Eleanor Montgomery before I ever met her. A legend in literary circles, razor sharp tongue, sharper instincts. Interns whispered her name with a mix of awe and fear. No one knew how she still had time to read everything and forget nothing, but she did. If she marked up your manuscript, it bled, and you were lucky for it. I met her on my third day at the literary magazine, where I had landed a barely paid assistant gig after someone else quit mid-week. I was filing back issues in the archives when she walked in, heels echoing on the floor like gunshots, trench coat swinging behind her. She didn't look at me, just dropped a manila envelope on my desk. Read this, write coverage. I want a real opinion, not flattery. If you say it's beautifully written, I'll throw it in the trash. I didn't sleep that night. I read the manuscript twice, took 10 pages of notes, and rewrote the one-page report 5 times before submitting it. The next day, she handed it back with one word scribbled across the top. Interesting. From Eleanor, that was the equivalent of a standing ovation. She started calling me into her office more often. Tell me why this opening doesn't work. What would you cut from this chapter? You're a writer. Don't look so surprised. I can tell. So stop being polite and start being useful. She pushed me. Hard. No compliments, no hand-holding. Only questions that made me rethink everything I thought I knew about writing. One afternoon, she caught me typing during lunch and asked what I was working on. I froze. A story, I muttered. Just a draft. She held out her hand. I hesitated, then handed it over. She read the whole thing in silence, sitting on the edge of my desk, boots crossed at the ankle. When she finished, she looked up. You have a voice, she said. Raw but distinct. Don't waste it writing safe. That night, I cried on the subway, not because she had praised me, she hadn't, not really, but because for the first time, someone who mattered had seen something in me, not as a daughter, not as a disappointment, as a writer. From then on, I worked twice as hard. I stayed late, rewrote pieces she tore apart, learned to take critique without crumbling. When she ignored me, I studied harder. When she challenged me, I fought to rise to it. I didn't want her approval. I wanted to earn it. And beneath all her sharpness, I think she wanted me to. There were two versions of me, and they lived separate lives like strangers sharing a face. In New York, I was a writer, a real one. My name had started to appear in literary journals that once felt untouchable. Editors began replying to my submissions with something more than form letters. I was invited to readings, to panels, to drinks after workshops where people asked thoughtful questions and actually waited for the answers. I was becoming someone, slowly, quietly, but undeniably. And yet, back home, none of it existed. At family dinners, when I flew back for holidays, the old version of me slipped on like a second skin, familiar, suffocating. I talked about the weather, about rent prices, about the noise in the city. I never mentioned the stories, never mentioned the magazine that printed my name beside authors I'd studied in college. I never said, I'm building something, because they never asked. It wasn't just that they didn't know, I didn't want them to. Not anymore. After so many years of polite disinterest, the idea of handing them my joy felt dangerous, fragile, like they might laugh again or change the subject, and all the strength I'd built outside that house would crack in an instant. So I kept the two lives separate. When my first short story was published in a national anthology, I celebrated with friends over cheap wine and loud music in a Brooklyn walk-up. We passed the book around like it was holy. Someone toasted to Rachel fucking Thompson, and I laughed so hard I cried. A week later, my mother called to remind me of Michael's birthday dinner. She asked if I could fly home and maybe bring something for dessert. I told her I was busy with work. She said, "Still at that little magazine?" I said yes. When my piece was nominated for a small but respected award, I didn't tell them. When it won, I still didn't. I printed out the article, framed it myself, and hung it above my desk. My real one, in my own apartment, with my name on the lease and stories on the shelves. Sometimes I imagined what it would be like to tell them, to hand my mother the book and watch her read the dedication, to see my father blink in surprise and ask a question, any question, but I never did. because deep down, I knew how that story ended with a nod, a shrug, a deflection toward Michael's next achievement. So I let them keep their version of me, the quiet daughter, the bookworm, the one with a vague job and nothing to show for it. It was easier to let them believe that because the real me was finally becoming something, and I wasn't going to let them touch it. She stood when I walked into the room, which already made her different, tall, graceful, with a kind of effortless confidence that didn't come from trying too hard. Jessica smiled at me like she meant it, not the polite, empty smile I was used to at these dinners. It was warmer, curious, like she'd actually been looking forward to meeting me. "You must be Rachel," she said, reaching out her hand. "Michael's told me so much about you." I smiled, automatic. "All good things, I hope." Michael chuckled, sliding his arm around her waist. "Don't worry, I left out the part where she used to steal my Halloween candy." It was meant to be a joke, but it landed wrong. Or maybe I was just tired of being introduced through childhood anecdotes, like I never grew past 12. We moved into the dining room, where everything was set with the good china, crystal glasses, embroidered napkins, silver cutlery that only made appearances for important occasions. The kind of table setting that usually meant the mayor was coming, or someone from the country club. Apparently, Jessica qualified. My mother was already in full hostess mode, offering wine, explaining the menu, complimenting Jessica's earrings with a little too much enthusiasm. She was practically glowing, and why wouldn't she be? Jessica was everything my mother valued, poised, stylish, from a good family, whatever that meant. I was placed, as usual, at the far end of the table, not next to anyone, not between conversations, just at the edge, watching. They talked about the wedding, venues, florists, country clubs. Jessica's parents were apparently friends with the events coordinator at some exclusive place that required a 2-year wait list. But not for them, of course. I nodded, sipped my wine, smiled when someone made a joke. I had rehearsed this role for years. "So, Rachel," Jessica said at one point, turning to me with genuine interest, "Michael mentioned you live in New York. What do you do there?" I opened my mouth to answer. "She works with books," my mother cut in, waving her hand. "Some small press or magazine. Nothing like Michael's work, of course." She turned back to Jessica. "Michael just made partner, 35, youngest ever." Jessica blinked, clearly caught off guard by the interruption. She glanced back at me, eyebrows slightly raised. I smiled again, the practiced one, the one that said, "Don't worry, I'm used to it." And I was. But something shifted then, a flicker in Jessica's eyes. She reached down, pulled her phone into her lap, and started to type. I watched her do it, watched her expression change, and in that moment I knew she wasn't just going to see me, she was going to find me. The seating chart never changes. Not officially, of course. There are no place cards, no formal assignments. But somehow, I always end up in the same seat, the furthest one from both ends of the table. Not close enough to participate, not far enough to excuse myself, just there. Tonight is no different. Jessica sits between my mother and Michael, their voices weaving together like threads in a well-rehearsed story. My father is diagonally across from me, half listening, occasionally nodding. And I, once again, am the space filler, the gap at the end of the table that needed a body, not a voice. The food is beautiful. Of course it is. Roast beef with a perfect crust, golden potatoes arranged like sculpture, carrots glistening with honey glaze. My mother only makes this meal for special occasions. Michael's promotions, her bridge club luncheons, dinners where someone important is coming. Jessica qualifies. I cut my meat into tiny, even bites, not because I'm hungry. God, I'm not. But because it gives me something to do. The clink of my knife is almost comforting, like proof I exist. No one asks me a question. No one even looks in my direction. Jessica tries. I see it in her glances, the brief moments where she starts to turn my way, only to be interrupted by my mother's next comment or Michael's next story. She's being swept into the current of this family, and I can't blame her for letting herself float. It's easy to be part of the circle when you're welcomed in with open arms. I remember trying to sit beside my mother once when I was 12, reaching for the seat on her right before Michael had entered the room. She tapped the back of my hand, smiling in that tight, practiced way. "Let Michael sit here, sweetheart," she said. "You'll be more comfortable at the end." That's where I've stayed ever since. They talk about wedding plans, table linens, signature cocktails, string quartets. My mother leans in conspiratorially to tell Jessica how proud she is that Michael found someone so refined, so well-mannered. I chew and nod and fold my napkin twice to keep my hands busy. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I see it. Jessica's phone, screen glowing beneath the tablecloth. Her thumb moves slowly, then stops. Her eyes widen just a fraction. She looks at me, really looks. I hold her gaze, unsure what she's seeing, unsure what she's read, but I know something's changed. I may be sitting at the edge of this table where they've always placed me, out of the way, out of focus, but I can feel the center shifting, and for once, it's tilting toward me. She waits until dessert is served. Maybe she's being polite, or maybe she's been thinking about it all through dinner, trying to figure out how to ask without making things awkward. But when the plates are cleared and the conversation dips, Jessica leans slightly in my direction. Not dramatically, not like a spotlight, just enough. "So," she says, casual but warm, "I've always wondered what it's like to live in New York. What part of the city are you in?" It's such a simple question, the kind people ask when they actually want to hear the answer. I blink, caught off guard. "Park Slope," I say. "Brooklyn." Her face lights up. "I love it there. The brownstones, the bookstores. It's like a movie." I smile, a real one this time. "Yeah, it's pretty great. I've been in the same place for a few years now." "And you work in publishing?" she asks, and this time she doesn't glance at my mother or let the conversation drift. Her eyes stay on mine. I hesitate, not because I don't want to talk about it, but because I'm not used to this. Someone asking, someone caring. "I do," I say. "I started in magazines, but now I'm more focused on fiction. Editorial work, mostly." She tilts her head, interested. "That sounds amazing. Are you working with any authors I might know?" My mother cuts in before I can answer. She's always been a reader. We couldn't get her outside in the summer. Always holed up with some fantasy book. It's said with a laugh, as if the memory is adorable rather than dismissive. Jessica glances her way, then back at me. She doesn't smile. "I think it's wonderful," she says gently. "There's something so powerful about shaping stories. That's what editors do, right? Help authors find the best version of their voice?" I nod, swallowing more emotion than I expect. "That's the goal, yeah." She holds my gaze like she's seeing me in real time. Not the placeholder sister, not the afterthought, just me. "You must have some incredible stories," she says. For a second, I almost tell her about the authors I've worked with, the nights I stayed up writing my own work after 8-hour days editing someone else's, the first time I saw my name in print and cried on the subway. But I stopped myself because across the table, my mother is watching now, not listening, just watching, waiting for me to say something that can be laughed off or minimized. So I smile again, soft and careful. "Maybe one day," I say. Jessica doesn't push. She just nods, like she understands more than she lets on. And in that moment, It feels like a window cracks open in a house I've spent my whole life trying to breathe in. It happens quietly. My mother is in the middle of describing the difference between garden roses and standard ones. Something about fullness, about elegance, about making a statement without being too showy. My father nods. Michael adds something about catering minimums. No one notices that Jessica's hand has slipped beneath the tablecloth again. But I do. I catch the faint blue glow, the subtle way her shoulders draw in, the tilt of her head. Her fingers move with practiced ease, quick, discreet. I know what she's doing before she even finishes typing. She's Googling me. And suddenly, I can't breathe. It's like watching two realities collide in slow motion. The version of me that lives at this table, soft spoken, forgettable, a ghost among silverware, and the version that exists in the world outside this house, the one with a byline, with words people underline and quote and write to me about. Jessica is scrolling now, her eyes scanning rapidly. She stops, blinks, scrolls again. I see the shift in her face before I see anything else. The soft crease in her forehead, the sharp inhale she doesn't quite take. Her gaze flicks up toward me, almost cautious, like I'm something entirely different than what she was led to believe. And I suppose I am. She looks back down at the screen. Her lips part slightly, then press together again. She's reading, really reading. Her thumb moves again, slowly this time, like she's savoring, confirming. She glances at Michael beside her, then at my mother, still explaining the symbolic weight of peonies in June weddings. Then she looks at me again. This time, she doesn't look away. I feel the heat rising in my chest, in my cheeks. Not from shame, not exactly. From the weight of it all, of years spent being invisible, of achievements folded quietly into drawers, of books signed and never mailed, of words that belonged to me but were never safe to share here. What is she seeing now? My author page? My picture at that panel in London? The quote from the Times review? The one that called my prose surgical, intimate, unforgettable? Is she watching the clip from the Penn Award ceremony? The one where my voice shook as I thanked the people who weren't in the room? A tiny sound escapes her, almost a laugh, but not quite, more like a breath with a question attached. She leans toward Michael, whispering something, showing him the screen. His expression changes instantly. Across the table, my mother is still talking about centerpiece heights, but everything has already changed. And I'm not sure if I want to run or finally speak. It starts with a whisper. Jessica leans into Michael, shows him the glowing screen, and says something I can't hear. He frowns at first, confused, and then takes the phone from her. His eyebrows lift almost immediately. He scrolls slowly at first, then faster. His lips part as if he's about to speak, but nothing comes out. Then he looks at me. "Is this you?" he asks, holding the phone up, his voice a mix of disbelief and something that almost sounds like awe. "Is this actually you?" The table goes silent. My fork hovers over a piece of carrot I've long since stopped caring about. My mother stops mid-sentence. My father looks up, blinking behind his glasses. Jessica turns the phone around and reads from the screen. Rachel Thompson, author of Beneath Silent Waters and the Weight of Unsaid Things, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Penn Faulkner Award, named one of the New Yorker's 40 Under 40. She looks up at me, voice soft but full of something fierce. "That's you, isn't it?" I want to disappear. I want to run from the room. But instead, I nod. My father lowers his fork slowly, his gaze flickering between me and the glowing phone. My mother stares like she's trying to solve an equation that doesn't add up. "There must be some mistake," she says flatly. "Our Rachel doesn't write books. She works at a little magazine." Jessica turns the phone toward her. "It's not a mistake. There are pictures, videos, quotes. It's her. Michael keeps scrolling, his voice quieter now. Why didn't you ever tell us? I did, I say, and it comes out smaller than I mean it to. You just never listened. No one speaks. I sent you copies of my first book, I continue, signed them, with a note. You never opened the package. My mother blinks rapidly, as if the memory is trying to crawl its way to the surface. That's not true, she says, but her voice lacks conviction. It was in the guest room, I say. I saw it there, still wrapped, next to the Christmas decorations. My father shifts in his seat. Is this serious? He asks. You've really won awards? You're on lists? I nod again, this time with more strength. Yes, Jessica is still watching me, something shining in her eyes. Pride, maybe, recognition. Something I never expected to see at this table. My mother's mouth opens, then closes. But why wouldn't you make it clear? I did, I say, and this time I don't lower my voice. You just never thought it was important. And just like that, the hierarchy at the table starts to tilt. For the first time in my life, they're all looking at me, really looking. My mother snatches the phone like it's a weapon aimed at her, staring down at the screen as if sheer will might make the words rearrange themselves into something less offensive. There are a lot of Rachel Thompsons in the world, she says, her voice clipped. This could be anyone. Jessica gently takes the phone back and scrolls. There's a video of her accepting the Penn Faulkner Award. That's her voice. That's her face. Silence falls again, heavier this time. I don't feel it. I've spent a lifetime trying to prove myself in this house. Tonight, I don't feel like begging. Michael finally speaks. Why didn't you ever tell us? His voice isn't angry, just stunned. I look at him, my jaw tight. I did. You didn't hear me. My mother lets out a short laugh that doesn't reach her eyes. You're being dramatic. If you'd written actual books, we would have known. I mailed you both signed copies, I say, each word sharp with restraint. You never opened the package. You didn't come to the launch. You never asked how it went. Her face hardens. I'm sure we were busy. It's not like you said it was important. I shouldn't have to label my dreams in bold print for you to care. Michael leans back, rubbing his forehead. All those years, you were doing all of this and we didn't even, he cuts himself off. I had no idea. My father hasn't moved. He stares at the table like he's watching a memory play out in the wood grain, the kind of stillness that isn't peace but paralysis. I read the reviews, Jessica says softly. Your book was called a masterpiece of emotional truth. It's breathtaking. My mother frowns. If she was doing so well, why is she still living in some tiny apartment in Brooklyn? I almost laugh. Because I love it there. Because I choose to be there. Not because I failed. The words hang in the air like smoke. I didn't write books to impress you, I say finally, quietly. I wrote them because no one in this house ever heard me when I spoke. My father lifts his gaze slowly. His mouth opens, then closes. He looks older than he did an hour ago. I didn't know, he murmurs. I truly didn't know. Jessica reaches for Michael's hand. He squeezes hers but keeps looking at me, like he's seeing someone completely new. My mother sits straighter. Her voice sharpens. Well, if this is true, if you've been writing about us, don't expect me to applaud it. I meet her eyes. I didn't write about you. I wrote what it felt like to be unseen. And for once, no one says a word. Even my mother falls quiet. And in that silence, for the first time in my life, I finally feel like I'm being heard. My hands are trembling, but I keep them flat against my lap. If I clench my fists, I won't stop. If I speak too quickly, I'll cry. I've waited years for this moment. I won't let it slip through silence. You always say I never told you, I begin, my voice low, steady. But I did. I tried. No one interrupts. When I got my first story published, I called home. I was so excited I could barely breathe. Mom, you answered. You said you didn't have time to talk because you were heading to Michael's softball game. You told me to email you the link. I did. You never responded. My mother blinks, caught, but says nothing. When I got my book deal, I sent you a package, 2 signed copies, a note. I said I hoped you'd be proud. It sat unopened in the guest room next to a broken lamp and an old wreath. I saw it with the wrapping still on. You never mentioned it, not once. The silence around the table turns dense. No one's chewing. No one's breathing. When I won the PEN Award, I called from the hotel after the ceremony. I was still in my dress, still shaking. Dad, you answered. You said Mom had already gone to bed. You said to call back the next day. I did. No one picked up. My father opens his mouth, then closes it again. He looks devastated. I don't stop. You say I kept this from you, that I hid it. But what I really did was stop handing you pieces of myself only to watch you toss them aside. Do you know what that does to a person? To be so proud of something and know, it will mean nothing to the people who are supposed to care the most? Michael shifts beside Jessica, guilt written across his face like a confession. He looks younger now, like the older brother I used to beg to notice me. Every time I tried to show you who I was, you changed the subject to him, to his classes, his job, his girlfriend. I could have set myself on fire, and you would have asked me to pass the salt. No one speaks. Not even Jessica. I'm not asking for applause, I say. I never was. I just wanted to be seen, not as the extra, not as the quiet one in the corner, just as me. The truth hangs in the air, raw and unvarnished. My mother's eyes are glassy now. My father is looking at his hands like they might hold a different version of history. Michael won't meet my gaze. And for the first time, I'm not afraid of their silence. Because finally, it's not my burden to carry. It's theirs. Jessica's voice breaks the silence gently, like a pebble dropped into still water. Your books, she says carefully, the ones about the youngest daughter, the one who feels like a shadow in her own home, were they based on your family? For a second, I don't answer. Not because I'm unsure, but because there's something so fragile in the question, like she's asking for more than just backstory, like she already knows the answer and is giving me the choice to say it out loud. My mother stiffens across from me. My father shifts in his chair. Michael draws in a quiet breath. I meet her eyes. They're fiction, I say softly. The characters are made up. The details aren't real. I pause. But the feelings? Those are mine. She nods slowly. Her expression doesn't change, but I can tell she understands. Not just the words, but the weight of them. The ache between the lines. My mother crosses her arms. So you wrote stories about us, airing private family matters to strangers? I turn to her. No, I wrote about what it feels like to be overlooked, to love people who don't know how to love you back. That's not about you. It's about me, my experience, my silence. She opens her mouth like she might argue, then closes it again. Jessica speaks again, voice quiet but sure. The way your characters describe that emptiness, the hunger for acknowledgement, it felt real, like grief that never got a name. My throat tightens. I nod. Sometimes, I say, I had to write it just to know I wasn't imagining it. My father is staring at the table now, his hands folded tightly. I read a few lines just now, he murmurs. One said, she grew up in a house where her voice echoed, unanswered. He looks up at me. That was you, wasn't it? I don't have to reply. The answer lives in the silence. Michael leans forward, elbows on the table, looking at me like he's seeing someone entirely new. I never realized. I was always so caught up in my own stuff. I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't expect you to, I say. You were too busy being who they wanted you to be. His face folds into something like guilt. It's not about blaming anyone, I continue. It's about telling the truth. I spent years putting it on the page because I couldn't say it out loud. Now I have. The table is quiet again, but it's a different kind of silence. Not avoidance, not dismissal. It's recognition. And that, after all these years, feels like something close to healing. No one goes back for seconds. The roast sits untouched at the center of the table, its once perfect slices drying at the edges. The carrots have gone cold. The mashed potatoes are congealing in their bowl. But no one moves. Plates are half full, wine glasses barely sipped. The conversation limps on, awkward and halting. My mother tries to mention wedding cake flavors again, her voice thinner now, like she's reading from a script she's no longer sure she believes in. My father nods along, but he keeps glancing at me like he wants to say something and can't figure out how. Michael clears his throat and talks about the honeymoon, Italy, maybe Greece. But the enthusiasm is gone. His eyes keep drifting back to me, as if I might vanish if he looks away for too long. Jessica stays quiet now. She said what mattered. She's the only one who did. I sit at the edge of the table, still in my usual seat, still on the periphery. But everything feels different. Not because they fully accepted who I am. They haven't, not yet. But because, for the first time, they know I exist. It's uncomfortable, and I think that's okay. Every once in a while, my mother steals a glance at me, her expression unreadable. Her hand tightens around her wine glass. She hasn't spoken directly to me since I said the word invisible, since I looked her in the eye and refused to flinch. She isn't used to that. My father finally breaks the silence. I'd like to read your books, he says quietly. All of them, if you're willing. I look at him. He seems smaller than I remember. Or maybe I've just grown. I'll send you copies, I say. Signed, like last time. He nods, his face coloring with something like shame. This time, I'll open the package. It's a small thing, but it lands like a boulder. My mother stands suddenly, collecting plates with a forced clatter. I'll get started on the dishes, she says, already halfway to the kitchen. Jessica stands too. I'll help. No, I say quickly, standing before I can stop myself. Let me. She hesitates, but nods. I follow my mother into the kitchen. The silence between us buzzes like static. She stacks plates. I turn on the faucet. For a moment, the only sound is running water. She doesn't look at me when she speaks. You could have told me, she says. Really told me. I place a dish in the sink. I did. The silence returns. But this one feels different. It's not the silence of dismissal. It's the silence of something starting to break open. It arrived on a Tuesday, a plain white envelope tucked among bills and flyers in my Brooklyn mailbox. The handwriting stopped me cold, neat, precise, familiar in a way that made something deep in my chest pull tight. I took it upstairs without opening it, set it on my desk, and just stared at it for a while. I hadn't received a handwritten letter from my father in, I don't even know how long, maybe never. Birthday card signed Love Dad in his careful print. Yes, but this was different. He'd used my full name on the front, not just Rachel, Rachel E. Thompson, the way it appears on my book covers. When I finally opened it, the paper was lined, the ink slightly smudged in places, like his hand had hesitated or shaken. I read the first sentence 3 times before I could move on. Rachel, I finished your book. Twice, actually. I sat down. The first time, I read for the story. The second time, I read for your voice. I can't believe how much of you I missed all these years. I want to say I'm sorry, and I know that's not enough. I know I should have paid more attention. I should have asked more questions. I should have opened that package the moment it arrived. I don't know why I didn't. I think, if I'm honest, part of me was afraid of what I'd find, that you'd become someone remarkable, and I hadn't noticed. My hands were trembling now, the paper softening from how tightly I was holding it. Your writing, it stunned me. Not just the beauty of it, but the pain I recognized in between the lines. It broke me a little, reading what you've carried, what you turned into something so powerful. You matter, Rachel. I see that now. I should have seen it then. I see you. I'm proud of you, not just for the books, but for the woman you've become. The courage it took to say what you said, the strength it took to keep going when we gave you nothing. I hope you'll give me the chance to try again. I want to know you, not the quiet daughter from family dinners, but the person who filled those pages with so much truth. If you're willing. Love, Dad. I set the letter down and let my head fall into my hands, and I cried. Not the silent kind I'd trained myself to master, but the kind that comes from something breaking open and finally being let out. For the first time, he hadn't just heard me. He'd listened. It started with a text. Hey, that letter from Dad. Wow. I stared at the message for a long time, unsure how to respond. I hadn't heard from Michael since that dinner. No follow-up, no apology, no awkward attempt at small talk. Just that text, short and tentative, like a hand held out in the dark. Yeah, I replied. It surprised me too. The next day he called. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice was quiet at first, more careful than I remembered. I didn't know if you'd pick up. I almost didn't. Fair, he said. There was a pause. I guess I just wanted to start over, maybe, if you're open to that. I didn't say yes, not right away, but I didn't hang up either. We talked for an hour about nothing at first. Jessica's new job, the wedding venue, whether or not to do a plated dinner or buffet. He talked, and I listened, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like he was performing for an audience. It was just him. Then he said, I ordered your book. I blinked. You did? 2 copies. One for me, one for Jess. She already read it. Said it made her cry on the subway. I laughed, surprised. That tracks. He got quiet for a moment. Rachel, I'm sorry. I didn't ask what for. I didn't need to. He continued. I always thought you had it easier. Less pressure, you know. No expectations to be the best. But I didn't see what that actually meant. Being ignored isn't freedom. It's just a different kind of prison. I swallowed. Yeah, it is. I was the favorite, he said, not with pride, but with a kind of shame. And I never once asked how that felt for you. I was too busy enjoying it. There was silence between us, but it didn't feel heavy, just full. Thank you, I said, for saying that. Since then, we've talked every week. Nothing dramatic. Just real. He asks about my writing. I ask about his life outside the resume. Sometimes we trade memories, small ones, like the time we built a fort out of blankets in the living room and our mom made us take it down before guests arrived. He remembered. I was shocked. I thought you forgot everything, I said. I didn't forget, he replied. I just didn't realize which things mattered. Neither of us is pretending we're suddenly best friends, but we're building something new. Not a perfect bridge, but a sturdy one. And for the first time, we're meeting each other halfway. The first time she called after the dinner, I almost didn't answer. The name lit up my screen like a warning, and my thumb hovered over the decline button longer than I'd like to admit. But something, hope or habit, made me swipe instead. Hello? A pause. Then her voice, brittle and trying too hard to sound breezy. I ran into Marilyn Jenkins at the club today. Her daughter teaches English at Ohio State. She's assigned your book in one of her courses. Can you believe that? It wasn't really a question. It was her way of saying, I'm proud, without saying it. That was how she worked. Praise wrapped in performance, affection laced with control. That's nice, I said. Another pause. I could hear the clink of her spoon against a teacup. She always made tea when she didn't know what else to do. You never told me your book had language in it, she said with a hint of accusation. Some of the women in my bridge group were quite shocked. I bit back a sigh. It's literary fiction, Mom. It reflects life. I just don't understand why everything has to be so raw. Her tone was sharper now, less uncertain. It makes people think you had a terrible childhood. I could feel my jaw clench. It wasn't terrible. It was complicated, and I wrote the emotional truth of that. Well, she said after a silence that stretched, I didn't realize you felt that way. I almost laughed. You didn't want to realize. There's a difference. That stung. I heard it in her inhale, but she didn't deny it. We didn't talk long, just enough for the air to shift a little, for her to make it known she was watching now, Googling articles, reading interviews, clipping reviews from magazines she never used to buy. But it wasn't simple. Some days she'd send a text. Saw you on the morning show. That blouse was lovely. Other days, she said nothing at all, like the silence was safer. I knew she was proud. I also knew she didn't know what to do with it. Not when it came packaged in words she didn't understand, in stories that asked questions she'd spent her whole life avoiding. Loving my mother had always felt like trying to hug a statue, cold, elegant, unmoving. But now cracks had formed, tiny ones, and through them, just sometimes, I could feel a warmth trying to reach through. She didn't apologize. She never said she was wrong, but she called. And for her, that was something. The invitation came over the phone, casual on the surface, but I could hear the tension beneath Michael's words. Jessica had an idea, he said, for the engagement party. She was wondering if you'd want to do a reading from one of your books. Silence settled between us. Not the strained silence we used to sit in growing up, but something newer, careful, respectful, waiting. A reading? I echoed. She thought it might be meaningful, he added quickly. You know, since most of the people there don't really know you yet, she said your writing is how you show yourself. That stopped me, because it was true. I had spent so long trying to be seen by this family, only to finally be recognized by someone from the outside looking in. And now I was being asked to speak, not as a daughter, not as a sister, but as myself. I don't want to take attention away from you and Jessica, I said, not quite meeting the vulnerability blooming in my own voice. Michael laughed. You won't. You'll be giving people a piece of who you are. And honestly, I want them to know you, the real you. Something in me softened. I thought about the dinner, the way Jessica had Googled my name like it was an act of rebellion, the way she'd looked at me with nothing but admiration while my mother wilted in confusion. I thought about how I'd felt then, exposed, terrified, seen. Okay, I said quietly. I'll do it. There was a beat of surprised relief in Michael's voice when he replied, Seriously? That's great. He went on to say they'd set up a little podium near the garden, that Jessica had already told the caterers to have champagne ready afterward, that Jessica's aunt, an English teacher, had brought 3 of my books to Florida and lent them out to half her retirement community. It was surreal. But as I hung up, I felt the flutter of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel at home before. Anticipation, not dread, not resignation. Just the quiet hope that, for once, I'd get to stand in the light. I still wasn't sure how my mother would react, whether she'd smile through gritted teeth or find an excuse to disappear into the kitchen. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't matter anymore because I'd been invited. My voice had been asked for, and this time I would not whisper. The seating chart arrived in an email. Subject line: Final layout, just so you know where you'll be. Jessica had attached a simple PDF. Table 1, center of the tent, closest to the garden arch. Names in neat boxes: hers, Michael's, Jessica's parents, and mine. It took me a moment to realize what I was looking at. Not just a table, the table. I stared at it longer than I should have. My name had never appeared there before, not at birthdays, not at holidays. I'd always been at the outer edge, near the cousins, or worse, beside the guest bathroom, where no one lingered. Now I was flanked by Jessica's mother and Michael, like I belonged. When I arrived at the party, the tent was already filling with guests. String lights glowed above, and a jazz quartet played soft background music. I spotted my parents across the lawn. My mother was talking to someone from her bridge club. My father stood quietly beside her, nodding at something he probably hadn't really heard. Rachel! Jessica waved me over, beaming. Come, I want to show you where you're sitting. She didn't say it like a big reveal, just casually, as if it were natural, as if she didn't know what it meant. But I knew. The table was elegantly set with white linen, gold-rimmed plates, and a single card in front of each seat. I picked up mine. Rachel, not Rachel T., not a misspelled version of my name, just Rachel. As guests filtered in, I caught a few surprised glances, some from family who had never seen me placed at the center, some from my mother's friends who had only just realized I was that Rachel Thompson. I sat down, careful not to make too much of it, though inside my heart beat a strange rhythm, one part joy, one part disbelief. My mother took her seat across from me, her smile tight but present. Her napkin fluttered in her lap as she settled in, glancing toward me, then quickly away. My father nodded in my direction, giving me a small, uncertain smile. Progress, I reminded myself, slow, strange progress. And then Michael sat beside me. Looks good, right? He said, gesturing to the table. Jessica fought for it. Did you? I asked, half joking. He smiled. Maybe a little, but I wanted it too. I looked at the silverware, at the flowers, at the seat I occupied, not just physically, but symbolically. After years of being placed on the fringe, someone had made a space for me in the center, and this time I hadn't had to fight for it. The microphone felt heavier than I expected, a delicate silver thing perched on a stand in front of the small garden podium Jessica had arranged, surrounded by candles and evening air thick with rose and peony. I stood behind it, heart hammering like it had the night of my first book launch. Except this time, the audience wasn't strangers. It was family. They sat at round tables beneath the soft glow of fairy lights, half-finished plates of salmon and asparagus forgotten as I stepped into the circle of attention. Michael gave me an encouraging nod. Jessica, arms folded loosely in front of her, smiled without pressure. My father leaned slightly forward. My mother, well, she looked like someone bracing for impact. I took a breath, then another. This is from the middle of my novel, I said, voice surprisingly steady, where the protagonist returns home after years away and finally finds the courage to tell her truth. I didn't say my truth. I didn't have to. I read a scene where a woman walks back into the house where she was always too loud, too strange, too much. A house filled with photos she's not in, stories she was never part of. She stands in the living room while her parents glance up briefly from their conversation about someone else's promotion. She says, I wrote a book. They say, that's nice, dear. She says, it's about a girl who disappears from her own family. They blink. They nod. They forget. When I finished, the silence held for a beat too long. My fingers trembled slightly as I stepped back. Then someone clapped, then another. It wasn't raucous or polite. It was slow, genuine, swelling from scattered tables until the garden filled with the sound of hands coming together. My father stood. He clapped. My mother didn't move right away, but she didn't look away either. Her eyes were locked on mine, something unreadable flickering behind them. Shame, maybe, or the first fragile glimmer of understanding. Michael was the first to reach me, wrapping me in a hug. "You were incredible," he whispered. "Really?" Jessica followed, her eyes shining. "You have a way of pulling the air out of the room and then giving it back softer." And still my mother watched. Later, she would come up to me in the quiet aftermath, glass of untouched champagne in her hand, and say, "That part about disappearing, that wasn't just the character, was it?" "No," I would answer, and she would nod, once. But for now, I stood in the garden surrounded by applause, and for the first time in my family's presence, I did not feel invisible. The house felt different, not redecorated or repainted, just quieter somehow, less performative, as if the walls had exhaled. It was Sunday, a week after the engagement party. I hadn't planned to come back so soon, but when Dad called and asked if I wanted to stop by for dinner, just the three of us, I said yes before thinking it through. Now, sitting at the same mahogany table that had once swallowed me whole, I was waiting for the discomfort, but it hadn't arrived yet. My mother brought out the salad herself. No grand announcement, no unnecessary flourish, just a bowl of arugula with shaved parmesan and walnuts. "I didn't overdress it," she said almost shyly. "You always hate it when I drown the greens." I blinked. "Thank you." We ate in near silence for a few minutes. No mention of Michael, no long monologue about someone's fundraiser or a neighbor's remodel, just the sound of forks against porcelain and the occasional creak of a chair. "I started your first book," my father said eventually, as if testing the weight of the words. "Oh," I tried to sound casual. He nodded. "I like the one with the sister, the one who disappears in her own family." He paused. "She reminded me of someone." My mother looked up sharply. Then, to my surprise, she spoke. "That scene in the attic with the photo albums, that one got to me." She didn't say why. She didn't need to. We all remembered the box of albums stored in our real attic, the ones filled with Michael's milestones, my existence captured in two blurry candids. For the first time, they weren't pretending my books were some distant fiction. They were reading them for what they were, a map of where I'd been, of what I had survived. After dinner, my mother surprised me again. She brought out a worn envelope and laid it on the table. "I found the package you sent," she said. "3 years ago. I never opened it. I didn't even remember putting it away." Inside were the signed copies of my debut. The note I'd written still tucked into the cover, folded neatly. She didn't say she was sorry, but she didn't have to. Her face said enough. Later, as I was leaving, my father followed me to the door. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said, "but I want to be part of your life now, if you'll let me." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. There was so much still unspoken, so much to unlearn. But for the first time, it felt like they were trying, really trying. And that, the trying, was everything. The next time I visited, the framed photos in the hallway had shifted. Not all of them. Michael's graduation still took center stage, of course, but two new ones had appeared at the end of the row. One was of me on stage in a long black dress, holding the Penn Faulkner Award. The other, a candid Jessica must have taken, showed me reading aloud at the engagement party, smiling faintly mid-sentence. It startled me, seeing myself there, not in a corner or an afterthought, but on the wall, among them. In the kitchen, my mother was arranging tulips in a vase. I read the second novel, she said without looking up. I had to Google some of the reviews to understand what the critics meant. A beat passed, but it made me think, especially the chapter with the mother who talks about herself more than she listens. I almost didn't respond, not because I didn't have words, but because I didn't want to break whatever delicate honesty was blooming between us. She glanced at me, uncertain. I know I got it wrong. A lot of things. It wasn't just you, I said, but yes. She nodded. That was it. No argument, no defensiveness. Just space. Michael stopped by later that afternoon, unshaven and in sweatpants, which in our family was its own form of vulnerability. I'm reading the first book again, he said, flopping onto the couch beside me. It hits different when you know the context. I raised an eyebrow. You mean when you know it's about me? And you, he said. About all of us, kind of. I think I missed a lot growing up. We both did. There was something calming about admitting it. Not in a blameful way, but as fact. Like cleaning a wound you'd ignored for years. That night, after dinner, my dad pulled a folded printout from his back pocket. I joined Goodreads, he announced with awkward pride. Your fans are quite passionate. I laughed genuinely. You didn't comment, did you? No, he said quickly, but I liked a few reviews. The moment was small, almost ridiculous, but I held on to it. They weren't perfect. They still interrupted when I spoke, still forgot basic facts about my schedule, still praised Michael with a kind of reflex they didn't quite know how to curb. But something had changed. It wasn't just their behavior, it was my own. I was no longer waiting for them to validate me. I was showing them who I had become and letting them decide what they did with it. And for the first time in my life, they were choosing to see. For so long, I lived in two worlds. There was the world where I was seen, at readings, in lecture halls, on pages that carried my name into places I had never been. In that world, people listened when I spoke. They asked questions, they wrote letters, they underlined sentences and called them brave. That world saw me as a voice, a storyteller, a name that mattered. And then there was the other world, the one with the mahogany dining table and the perfectly arranged place settings, the one with roast beef dinners and family stories I wasn't part of. In that world, I was the quiet one, the overlooked one, the daughter with some job in publishing. For years, I thought the only way to survive was to keep those two selves apart, to protect the part of me that had grown wings from the house, that had once tried to clip them. But something shifted the night my name was Googled beneath that table. Not because it changed who I was, but because, for the first time, it changed how they saw me. It wasn't immediate. My mother still hesitated, still offered compliments with caution, like they might run out. My father still got plot details wrong and referred to characters by the wrong names. But they were trying. More than that, they were showing up. A month ago, my mother asked if I'd sign a copy of my first book for her friend Gloria. She keeps asking about the part with the sisters. I told her you wrote that one for me, she said with a small smile, the kind that carried decades of weight. And just last week, my father sent me a photo of a table display at his golf club library. My book stacked next to a little placard that read, Author, our own Rachel Thompson. There's a tenderness in this chapter of my life I never expected to find. Not perfect reconciliation, not some sweeping apology that makes everything neat, but small, honest recognitions, moments of eye contact that last longer, questions asked without expectation, just curiosity. And the biggest change? I let them see me, all of me. Not just the daughter who shows up twice a year and keeps things pleasant, not just the writer with accolades, but the woman who carries both heartbreak and pride in equal measure. They still don't understand all of it. They don't have to. Because for the first time, I am not explaining myself. I am simply being fully seen